Chapter 19. Seeing Beyond the Veil. The Survival of the Soul and Life Beyond Death. For life is eternal, and love is immortal, and death is only an horizon, and an horizon is nothing save the limit of our sight. Anonymous. There is no death, only a change of worlds. Native American Chief. No book on the soul can be complete without a consideration of what happens to us when we die. It is truly astonishing that after millennia of human life on this planet, and all the vast amount of knowledge that is now available to us, we still know virtually nothing about the mysterious, frightening, and challenging experience of our lives, our birth and our death. From what other dimension of reality do we come at our birth? And to what other dimension of reality do we go when we die? The answers to these questions, which Socrates addressed on the eve of his own death in the account given in Plato's Phaedo, seem clearer then than they are now, nearly 2,500 years later. Even more extraordinary is the fact that science and our culture as a whole have, until very recently, ignored the existence of the large body of material gathered over the past 100 or so years by institutions devoted to recording non-ordinary experiences, near death, after death, and out-of-body experiences, NDE, ADE, and OBEs, as well as communications to the living from the dead. Nor has science accepted as worthy of attention the shamanic experiences of visionaries and mystics of all cultures and times, which have testified to the existence of other dimensions of reality and the possibility of communion with them. The belief of mainstream science that the death of the physical brain is the end of consciousness has created a kind of firewall, closing our minds to this evidence as well as to the growing evidence that consciousness is not limited to the human brain, thereby confining us to a prison of our own making. This reductionist belief is reflected in a statement by Stephen Hawking, reported in The Guardian 2011. Brains are like computers. There is no heaven or afterlife for broken-down computers. That is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark. In view of the fact that death has always been part of human experience and comes to us all, sooner or later, it seems strange that something of the greatest significance to everyone is given so little attention. However, as Jung pointed out in his autobiography, critical rationalism has apparently eliminated, along with so many other mythic conceptions, the idea of life after death. This could only have happened because nowadays most people identify themselves almost exclusively with their consciousness and imagine that they are only what they know about themselves. Yet anyone with even a smattering of psychology can see how limited this knowledge is. A great deal will yet be discovered which our present limited view would have ruled out as impossible. As long as science insists that the universe is dead, with no inner dimension, consciousness, or soul, and that the physical brain is the origin of consciousness, these beliefs will continue to cripple and constrict the human spirit and limit the horizon of our sight. As long as it continues to believe with Bertrand Russell that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual beyond the grave, it will continue to block the growth of human understanding and stifle the longing of the human heart. Christopher Bache comments on this situation in his book Dark Night, Early Dawn. Western thought has committed itself to a vision of reality that is based almost entirely on the daylight world of ordinary states of consciousness, while systematically ignoring the knowledge that can be gained from the nighttime sky of non-ordinary states. Trapped within the horizon of the near-at-hand mind, our culture creates myths about the unreliability and irrelevance of non-ordinary states. Meanwhile, our social fragmentation continues to deepen, reflecting in part our inability to answer the most basic existential questions. This restricted view of reality has left an aching void in many people's lives that neither religious belief, nor scientific progress, nor improving the material circumstances of our lives can fill. although these are presented as offering all that is necessary to ameliorate the suffering of the human condition. What is missing is a sense of our relationship with an invisible dimension, knowledge of how this relationship can be cultivated, and how fear of death can ultimately be replaced by trust in our survival. There have been many great teachers who have pointed the way to a direct experience of reality, but their message and their teachings have, for the most part, been misinterpreted or ignored. The neglect of a vitally significant field of human experience has meant that the experiences and discoveries related to this field are considered to be irrelevant or worse, symptoms of deluded and superstitious minds. We no longer have access to other levels or modes of consciousness because our rational mind has, over the last 4 centuries, increasingly ridiculed, disparaged, and repressed what it has been unable, so far, to accept, prove, or comprehend. It has therefore cut us off from those deeper instinctive aspects of our nature that have the power to connect us with other dimensions of reality. Access to those deeper dwelling faculties has been denied for centuries, and has led to them becoming atrophied for want of use. From this metaphysical desolation, the denial and repression of these intuitive, creative, and imaginative aspects of ourselves, together with the sense that life is fundamentally meaningless, has come our secular belief system and a culture of escalating violence which now threatens us with the disintegration of civilization and ultimately with the possible extinction of our species. William James's carefully chosen words, written 100 years ago, seem more relevant than ever today. Our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. We may go through life without suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus, and at a touch they are there in all their completeness, definite types of mentality which probably somewhere have their field of application and adaptation. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. Our understanding of life and the interconnectedness of all aspects of it is now tragically deficient. Sogyal Rinpoche writes in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, all the greatest spiritual traditions of the world, including, of course, Christianity, have told us clearly that death is not the end. They have all handed down a vision of some sort of life to come, which infuses this life that we are leading now with sacred meaning. But despite their teachings, modern society is largely a spiritual desert, where the majority imagine that this life is all that there is, without any real or authentic faith in an afterlife. Most people live lives deprived of any ultimate meaning. I have come to realize that the disastrous effect of the denial of death go far beyond the individual. They affect the whole planet. Believing fundamentally that this life is the only one, modern people have developed no long-term vision, so there is nothing to restrain them from plundering the planet for their own immediate ends, and from living in a selfish way that could prove fatal for the future. Fear of death and ignorance of the afterlife are fueling the destruction of our environment that is threatening all our lives.
Suppose we knew, beyond any possibility of doubt, that we are immortal, that the finality of death is the greatest of our illusions. Suppose we knew that death is simply a change of worlds, and that when we die we enter another dimension of reality, another state of being, without losing the consciousness we have in this one. The perspective on our lives would change if we knew that death is like a second birth, a birth into a world that is as real as this one, where we are reunited with family and close friends, and can explore, grow, and use our creative gifts with a freedom that many of us do not have here. How would the way we live our lives in this world change if we knew that the journey beyond the death of the body leads us into a vastly expanded life in multiple dimensions, or worlds beyond this one, and that we inhabit a soul body after we have parted with our physical one. We could awaken to awareness of something that was once instinctively known and has long been forgotten, an understanding that we participate in and are contained by the creative consciousness and loving intelligence of the universe. Whatever name we give this consciousness, God, universal mind, or intelligence, cosmic soul, energy, or spirit, does not really matter. What matters is that we recognize the existence of a dimension of reality beyond the one we know and begin to enter into a relationship with it. In all cultures, even our own modern secular one, the belief in immortality is deeply instinctively present in the human soul. It may be that this belief has its far distant origins in the observation of the moon and its cyclical process of death and regeneration. The greatest myths from the ancient world, those of Sumer, Egypt, and Greece, as well as the Christian myth of the death and resurrection of Jesus, all offer the lunar imagery of rebirth after the 3 days of darkness. While working together on the last chapter of the myth of the goddess, Jules and I came across these deeply reflective words of the poet Rilke, which enlarge the boundaries of our limited vision.
Death is the side of life averted from us, unshone upon us. We must try to achieve the greatest consciousness of our existence, which is at home in both unbounded realms, inexhaustibly nourished from both. The true figure of life extends through both. There is neither a here nor a beyond, but the great unity in which the beings that surpass us, the angels, are at home. We of the here and now are not for a moment hedged in the time world, nor confined within it. We are incessantly flowing over and over to those who preceded us. The sudden intrusion of death.
I know that for many people in their later years, the inevitability of death weighs like a stone on their hearts. Yet they cannot share their grief and apprehension with their children or friends, because even though death is an experience that awaits each one of us, it is still deeply threatening to talk about it. In a culture which believes that consciousness originates in the brain, and that the death of the brain must inevitably bring about the extinction of consciousness, the subject of our survival beyond the death of the body rarely comes up for discussion. And so the deeper concerns of the heart are unable to find a channel of expression. Unsurprisingly, in view of this silence, the greatest sorrow, the greatest fear we can experience in our lives is the loss of a beloved parent, child, or companion, believing either that he or she may be lost to us forever, or that reunion with them is uncertain. Despite my trust in our survival and the certainty that this life is not my only one, the awareness of death evokes deep sorrow in me. Sooner or later, I, like everyone else in the world, will experience the loss of a loved one, and eventually my own death, and the parting from my husband, daughter, and grandson. So many millions of people today lose their lives suddenly and prematurely, not only through terrorist bombs and war, but through devastating diseases such as AIDS and cancer, as well as fatal accidents and unforeseen natural disasters like earthquakes and tsunamis. The brutal intrusion of the premature death of a loved one into people's lives and the anguish of their deep grieving creates a pressure to discover more about the fate of those so abruptly banished from this dimension. Many old people prolong their lives through fear of death and separation from those they love. If we knew more about what happens after death, it might lessen the pain of the loss of a loved one and encourage people to trust in their own survival and trust that those closest and dearest to them are not lost to them forever. This trust is particularly vital in the lives of children whose grief at being abandoned by the death of a parent can develop later in life into uncontrollable rage or self-destructive patterns of behavior.
In our Western society, it is no longer part of the ritual of death to sit with the body or have relatives and friends come to say goodbye to the deceased and put flowers in the coffin. Children very rarely see the body of a grandparent or a parent and are shielded from the reality of what a dead body looks like. Many people are cremated rather than buried. That particular ceremony seems almost surreal because it ends abruptly after an allotted number of minutes in order to make room for the next group of mourners coming to say goodbye to a loved one. While there may be mention of eternal life, a return to God and similar time-honored and reassuring ideas at a funeral or a cremation, people are given no idea of what the afterlife might be like, or what the passage from this life to another might entail, or of how to prepare for this experience. Whether it is our own death or the death of someone close to us, we may be deeply distressed by the fact that when so much passion and effort, suffering and love have been expended in living, everything we have built up, everything we have loved and cherished in our lives, or in those we love, has to be relinquished, often without preparation. Moreover, all that rich experience is, so to speak, gone forever, vanishing without trace in a moment. Many people who have lost loved ones may be left with deep feelings of grief, guilt, and anger, as well as regret over unfinished business with the departed that may affect them for the rest of their lives. What do we take with us as we approach the threshold of death? Surely the quintessence of our being, the memories of what we have loved, the love of children and grandchildren to whom we have given life, the love of the friends we have cherished and who have cherished us, the creative work whose residue we leave behind us, part seen, part unseen, because no one can express the full range of his or her being, nor can those closest to us know the extent of it. When my mother died, I instinctively put a rose into her coffin as a symbol of my love for her and the continuity of my relationship with her. Several years later, I was amazed to hear a medium say that my mother had been very touched by my gesture of farewell. Her words did not really surprise me, but confirmed what I already felt to be true, that our consciousness survives death. Thanks to my early out-of-body experience and the direction of my life took in response to that, and to the early messages received by my mother and her friends, I have gathered together over the years the testimony of many individuals who have spoken of their out-of-body experiences and how these have changed their lives and their attitude to death. The variety of human experience is so rich, extensive, and fascinating that I feel it essential to include this subjective experience in any consideration of what is of greatest value to us. And what could be of greater value than to know that consciousness survives the death of the body, as well as to know what actually happens to us when we die? Although I have enormous respect for science as a methodology, I do not accept the reductionist belief that the brain is the origin of consciousness, because it seems implausible in the light of what I and many others have experienced, the evidence that is now available about our survival, and the testimony of visionaries, mystics, and shamans of cultures past and present. Effects of the fear of death. I wonder whether the violence that is so endemic in humanity could be born not only from the experience of calamitous loss, but also from the unconscious fear of death, and the anger arising from the fact that we know so little about the deeper purpose of our presence on this planet, and believe that we have only one life to live. The fear of death, and the desire to ensure our own survival, has led us to kill others without the awareness that in doing so we are injuring all life. What would be the point of celebrating the killing of others if we knew that our bodies were only a temporary casing for an immortal consciousness? What would be the point of the huge engine of destruction that centuries of warfare have brought into being with the aim of destroying the body? Would we not realize that all our efforts to conquer, control, and kill others in order to protect our own tribal group or extend its power are a waste of resources, energy, and precious life? For centuries, Christians were taught to believe that death was a punishment introduced into the world through the sin of the fall, and that Christ's redemptive death on the cross had broken the power of death and given us access to the kingdom of heaven, provided we were baptized as Christians. According to this doctrine, to rise again in a physical body, not a spiritual body, at the day of judgment, we needed to have been baptized into the Christian faith. Not to have been baptized condemned the non-believer, and, until very recently in the Catholic religion, even the unbaptized infant to limbo. The atheist, of course, believes that death is the final end. He has only this one life and nothing beyond it. No modern belief system, as far as I am aware, apart from that of Tibetan Buddhism and certain shamanic cultures, prepares us for the actual experience of death or describes what life on the other side of death might be like, introducing the idea that death is a transition to other worlds or states of being. Past beliefs about the survival of the soul. For thousands of years, shamanic cultures have known that there is a ladder of connection between this world and an unseen reality, and that this reality sustains, permeates, and interacts with our own. Even to the present day, they have maintained a connection with their ancestors. Wherever a strong lunar mythology existed, there was a belief in the immortality of the soul. If we look back as far as Bronze Age Egypt, we find a highly developed and comprehensive cosmology and a detailed concept of the survival of the soul after death. This extraordinary civilization was as aware of the afterlife as of this life. People lived in awareness of the presence of the unseen world and the goddesses and gods who inhabited the starry cosmos and descended each day into their temples. Far from seeing death as extinction, the Egyptians saw death as a journey towards awakening to cosmic life and the invisible dimension of the cosmos that they call the Duat. The Book of the Dead and many books about the underworld are guides to entering ever more refined states of spiritual awareness in this invisible realm. When an Egyptian left his physical body, his Ba, soul, might cling to the body, unable to free itself from identifying with his former life, and he might therefore be bound to this earthly plane. But with the help of the gods, he could find release from this state and move into a spiritual body called the Sa or Sahu. In its fully awakened state, this spiritual body was represented by the Akh, the shining one or shining form, symbolized by the crested ibis. In this shining body, the Ba, soul, could be carried to the higher cosmic planes, associated with the sun and the stars. The Egyptians described this experience as coming forth into the day. Likewise, in ancient Greece, the secret rituals of the mysteries, celebrated at Eleusis and believed to have lasted for over 1,000 years, gave initiates the certainty of immortality. He who has seen the mysteries will not taste death. There are 4 other ancient cosmologies that speak of multiple hidden worlds and dimensions: the Vedic, the Sufi, the Tibetan, and the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah. As explained in earlier chapters, Kabbalah recognizes 4 interconnected worlds or planes of existence, set out as a tree of life, each one containing many more worlds or dimensions, each one transmitting the light emanating from the divine source, eventually bringing our material world into manifestation. Everything in this world is the reflection of its prototype in the higher worlds of finer vibrations. Everything is sacred because it has emanated from and is contained within the divine ground. Hence, the Kabbalistic saying, which actually originates in Egypt, as above, so below. Within this tradition, as well as in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and in Hinduism and Buddhism, there was, and still is, a belief in the existence of angels or spiritual beings who intervene to help and guide humanity. There was, and still is, a belief that the soul survives the death of the physical body. Strangely, however, with the exception of Tibetan Buddhism, there is no manual or guide on offer which might prepare us for what we will encounter in the extraterrestrial worlds. Long ago, in the 8th century, a great Buddhist tantric master called Padmasambhava, who brought Buddhism to Tibet, gave out a teaching on the after-death experience to his closest disciples and the ruler of Tibet. At his request, the text of this teaching was to remain concealed in one of Tibet's sacred mountains, there to await the appointed time when it was appropriate that it should be found and made available to the wider world. A long era of persecution followed, but incredibly, in the 15th century, the text of the Padmasambhava's teaching was found, and the news of it carried far and wide through the mountainous regions adjoining Tibet. Early in the last century, two great scholars, W.Y. Evans Wentz and the Lama Anagarika Govinda, translated one chapter of it into English, and this translation was first published in 1927 as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The third edition of this translation was published in 1957 by Oxford University Press, with a commentary by Jung. Now, for the first time, Penguin has published the entire text of 12 chapters or sections in a new translation called The Tibetan Book of the Dead, with an introduction and commentary by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, 2005. The greatest spiritual teachers have testified to the existence of this transcendent reality, have experienced the higher dimensions of it, may even have come as emissaries from them. Only by cleansing the doors of perception, as Blake advised us, can we become aware of the presence of these transcendent worlds. During the last quarter of the 20th century, a growing number of people have become convinced through their own subjective experience and through reading the many books on the subject that consciousness continues beyond the death of the body. Those who have been unexpectedly precipitated into a near-death or out-of-body experience and returned to their bodies have found that it has given them a new perspective on life. They now live in a different way, with less fear of death, and a greater sense of responsibility for their actions. Reincarnation. In a lunar culture, the idea that we have many lives, moving in and out of this physical dimension of reality, would have been thought of as perfectly natural, given the influence of the recurring cycles of the moon. I have long been convinced that we have many lives, fragments of which may return to us, some vividly and some as a faint memory, perhaps as a longing for a specific place or a strong attraction to someone who seems strangely familiar to us, or, conversely, a fear or dislike of places or people we barely know. When I first went to India and came across the belief in reincarnation in both Hinduism and Buddhism, it never occurred to me to question it. I felt totally at home in these religions so different from my own. Because of the breadth and depth of their concept of divinity and the oneness of life, the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita meant more to me than the Christian image of a remote God I had grown up with. I found myself drawn to study the life and teaching of the Buddha and the wonderful images of him that had spread from India all across Asia to China and Japan. They were so startlingly different from the images of the crucified Christ. It seemed obvious to me that thousands of years of contemplation in traditions that were far older than Christianity needed to be respected, and, moreover, the idea that we have many lives seemed so logical. One life was not long enough to encompass all aspects of the human condition, or to embrace all that was in me that wanted to live and experience. Nor did it give me time to learn all I wanted to know and apply that knowledge to how I lived my own life, however it was to unfold. The idea of one life was claustrophobic and somehow outrageously limited. The idea that we are continually reborn into this material dimension until we are able to recover the knowledge of our divine origin and begin consciously to relate to that source or ground made perfect sense. The teaching about the long-term karmic effects of my actions carried over from life to life made me more conscious of the need to act with greater awareness of how I was living and how I was treating other people. The concept of karma seemed more compassionate as an explanation of suffering and release from suffering than the concept of original sin, although its shadow aspect is reflected in the contempt with which people in India treat those belonging to the lower caste, believing that their birth into this caste indicates misdemeanors in another life. There were so many questions that could never be answered if the framework were limited to one life. But if widened to embrace many lives, everything made more sense. There was more time to pause and reflect on things instead of packing every moment with frenetic activity in case something was left out of my one and only life. In a recent book, Science and the Re-Enchantment of the Cosmos, 2006, Dr. Ervin Laszlo sums up the many cultures and peoples who have believed in reincarnation. It has been an intrinsic part of myth, metaphysics, and philosophy for thousands of years. It is an essential element in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Zoroastrianism, Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism, and Taoism. It is present in the belief systems of African tribes, of Native Americans and pre-Columbian cultures, of the Hawaiian kahunas, and of the Gauls and Druids. It was adopted by the Essenes, the Pharisees, the Karaites, and other Jewish tribes and groups. It remains an important element in the Kabbalah. In ancient Greece, the Pythagoreans and the Orphics subscribed to it. Plato spoke of metempsychosis, the transmigration of the psyche, in many of his famous dialogues, Phaedo, Phaedrus, Republic, and Timaeus. Julius Caesar mentioned it as a doctrine held by the Celts, and Roman historians noted that it was shared by the Germanic people. Reincarnation was once part of Christian doctrine until it was removed at the time of the Second Council of Constantinople in AD 553, when the Emperor Justinian anathematized the teachings of the great Christian teacher Origen about the pre-existence of the soul. Origen, circa AD 182 to 251, described by St. Gregory as the prince of Christian learning in the 3rd century, wrote, "Every soul comes into this world, strengthened by the victories and weakened by the defeats of its previous life. It seems nothing less than tragic that the Emperor Justinian, who, with his wife Theodora facing him, stands clothed in magnificent robes in the apse of San Vitale in Ravenna, in AD 529, closed down the 1,000-year-old Platonic Academy in Athens, driving out its last teacher, Damascius. Through the decision of one powerful man, Christianity was deprived of a teaching that could have given it far greater depth and a more comprehensive perspective on life. Western civilization was impoverished for nearly 1,000 years by the loss of the legacy of Platonic and Neoplatonic teaching, with all its rich insight into the nature of the soul. While some of this legacy was recovered in the 12th century through the schools of Chartres and Paris, giving rise to the splendor of the Gothic cathedrals, it only became fully accessible in 15th century Italy, when Cosimo de' Medici commissioned the philosopher Marsilio Ficino to translate the works of Plato. Healing the traumas of past lives. Past life regression is a recently developed approach to a deeper understanding of ourselves that confirms the fact that we each hold the experience and memory of many other lives. Using this method of regression, we can access buried memories which are held over from life to life in the wider field of the soul. We can, for example, relive and heal the trauma of a terrible death in another life, whose memory, held at the unconscious level of the psyche, affects our mental and physical health in this one, transmitting a legacy of constant anxiety and obsessive fear or guilt. Roger Woolger, who died in 2011, was a Jungian analyst and a pioneer in this field. For the last 2 decades, he worked to develop past life regression, calling it deep memory process. As he writes in his most recent book, Healing Your Past Lives, 2004, this method offers a set of tools for delving into the deep recesses of your unconscious mind, what we call the soul, to discover where memories of past existence are stored and bring them to light. They can open to you the transcendent reality of the soul. The physical, emotional, and mental memories and negative refrains from other lives can affect our present life, inhibiting our ability to respond to life's difficulties and challenges in a positive way. Severe depression in this life may stem from the memory of trauma carried through from another one. An individual may repeat the negative patterns of a previous life by being drawn to situations or people which may reconstellate the effects of the original trauma. As for healing this trauma, many people are involved in helping to release the souls of those still bound to this dimension by their suffering, particularly the souls of soldiers killed in war, who may not realize they have died, or those who have met an atrocious death at the hands of others. One of the most effective ways of helping those we have lost is to imagine them bathed in light, healed and whole and free of pain and distress, as clearly described in Sogyal Rinpoche's book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. The pioneering work of Edith Fiore, as explained in her book, The Unquiet Dead, is of particular note in this connection, as is the work of the Jungian analyst Edward Tick, working with war veterans as well as the souls of the dead, described in his moving book, War and the Soul, see Chapter 13. There is so much that is still to be discovered. What we perceive in this physical dimension of reality is only a fraction of the whole. Major sources of documentation for our survival beyond death. There is now an extensive amount of evidence for our survival beyond death of the body, as well as detailed studies of how the afterlife is envisaged in different religious traditions. Much of this evidence has been carefully examined by a number of distinguished people, among them scientists and lawyers, who were interested in ascertaining the facts about our survival. One of the most important testimonies comes from a book called The Supreme Adventure, 1961 and 1974, by a scientist called Dr. Robert Krukl. He analyzed a vast amount of material from every country and continent, from Brazil, from South Africa, from Tibet, from Europe, from India, and from Australia, and found that all accounts were consistent. There are at least 7 main sources of evidence for our survival after death, and these have been assembled on an outstanding and most informative website, www.victorzammit.com. Among these sources are 1. Tens of thousands of OBEs and NDEs. 2. Communications through high-level mediums from people who have died. 3. Direct experience through clairvoyance, clairaudience, and deathbed visions. 4. The out-of-body experiences of shamans and remote viewers. 5. The testimony of cardiologists, including Dr. Pim van Lommel of the Netherlands, whose book, Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of the Near-Death Experience, was published in English in 2010. 6. The holotropic states recorded by Stanislav Grof, MD, and Hal Zena Bennett in The Holotropic Mind, and by Christopher Beisch in Dark Night, Early Dawn, who describes his experience of an incredible field of personal, collective, and planetary memories. 7. Electronic phenomena, EVP, and instrumental transcommunication, ITC. A great pioneer. The greatest modern pioneer in opening up the subject of life after death for Western culture as a whole was Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Like the stunning impact of Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring in 1962, which opened our awareness to ecological concerns, the publication of Kubler-Ross's book On Death and Dying in 1969 tore away the opaque veil that had shrouded the subject of death. Almost single-handedly, assisted by her strong personality as well as her extensive clinical experience as a doctor and psychiatrist, she broke the taboo on the subject of death and transformed attitudes towards death and the care of the dying. Her later books, particularly On Life After Death, 1991, kept the subject before the eyes of the public, and thanks to the rapid dissemination of her ideas through the media, as well as many workshops in different countries, led to many thousands, if not millions, having a greater trust in their own and their loved ones' survival after death. Her writing also led for a time to far better care for the dying and respect for their needs, with many hospices for the dying being established. Her experience of caring for her dying patients taught her that many of them had NDEs and OBEs, which gave them trust in their survival beyond the death of their body, Increasingly fascinated by this subject, she and her team studied the records of the case histories of over 20,000 people from all over the world and from every cultural and social background who had an NDE and returned to life after being declared clinically dead. Some had returned to life naturally, and some through the rapidly developing skills of medical resuscitation. She compared the death of the physical body to the shedding of a worn-out casing or cocoon, releasing the butterfly of the soul into another dimension. These thousands of testimonies convinced her that there was no such thing as death, that it was an experience of transition to another state of consciousness, where you continue to perceive, to understand, to laugh, and to be able to grow. It seemed to her that it was nothing short of a tragedy that so many millions of us are not aware of this. She realized that after her many years of work as a psychiatrist with schizophrenic patients, and many more years of work caring for the dying, she needed most of all to communicate to people the fact that death was not the end of consciousness. The dying experience is almost identical to the experience at birth. It is birth into a different existence which can be proven quite simply. For thousands of years you were made to believe in the things concerning the beyond. But for me, it is no longer a matter of belief, but rather a matter of knowing. Through the many years of her work, she, like others who followed her, was able precisely to define what happens as we move from this dimension into another. She described how the first stage of the near-death experience begins with a feeling of serenity and calm, even feelings of joy and bliss. A person may become aware that he or she is leaving the body, floating above it, and with the unfamiliar ability to move around in the room and look down on the body, often from the ceiling. As soon as your soul leaves the body, you will immediately realize that you can perceive everything that is happening at the place of the dying, be it in a hospital room, at the site of an accident, or wherever you left your body. You do not register these events with your earthly consciousness, but rather with a new awareness, even during the time your body has no blood pressure, no pulse, no breathing, and, in some cases, no measurable brainwaves. She found that people gave clear descriptions of what they saw happening to them during surgery or cardiac resuscitation, or when being cut free from a car after an accident, even to such details as the license plate on the car that hit them. They could hear the words of the doctors and nurses working on their shattered bodies, and could repeat these later to the astonished and often skeptical helpers. A special study of blind people that she conducted showed that they were able to see and remember the colors, jewelry, clothes, and even the patterns on the clothes of the people engaged in resuscitating them. In the second stage of the NDE, the dead person who previously had been seriously injured or perhaps blind or deaf in their earthly lives realizes that they are restored to perfect wholeness and health. Those formerly blind and deaf reported that during their NDE they could see and hear. Even patients who had multiple sclerosis and were confined to a wheelchair reported that during their NDE they were able to move again, even to dance and sing. A person might be fully aware that he or she had lost a limb in an accident, but in the NDE he or she sees that limb rejoined to the body. This experience would seem to reflect the words in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Even though you may have been blind, deaf, or lame while you were alive, now your eyes see forms, your ears hear sounds, and all your sense faculties are faultless, clear, and complete. While the Tibetan words refer to the person who has just died, rather than to the one who is undergoing a near-death experience, the similarity between them is striking. Kubler-Ross found that children who were close to death moved in and out of an NDE state as the time of their death drew nearer. They said that a grandparent or other close relative on the other side had come to be with them and helped them with the transition. As her work gathering the thousands of experiences of NDEs developed, she found that no one who had one of these experiences was any longer afraid of dying. Many indeed wanted to return to the out-of-body state, where they experienced themselves as healed and whole. Since the care of dying children was her special concern, She sat with many who had been brought to hospital after car accidents. As she sat watching for the signs of serenity immediately preceding death, she found that a child might sometimes say that everything was all right and that their loved ones were waiting for them. In one example she shared, a child told her that her mother and brother were waiting for her, even though no one had told her that her mother and brother had been killed in the same accident. Another striking case that Kubler-Ross mentions describes how a young American Indian woman died in the arms of a stranger shortly after a hit-and-run accident, asking him, as she passed, to give a message to her mother that she was happy because she was with her dad. The stranger was so moved by this experience that he drove 700 miles to see the woman's mother on an Indian reservation. There he was told that her husband, father of the victim, had died of a coronary 1 hour before his daughter's accident. Many cases like this were reported where the dying person had not known of the prior death of another member of the family, yet was greeted by them. The third stage of the NDE, which can sometimes anticipate the awareness of the physical body being separate from the observing consciousness, is the experience of moving very rapidly through a tunnel or cylinder-like funnel, often accompanied by a loud roaring noise, as of a rushing wind, avalanche, or waterfall. This is the experience that I myself had when I was 11, and I remember the loud roaring noise and the tunnel as being terrifying because I didn't know what was happening to me. Had I known then what I know now, it would greatly have diminished my fear. As they move through the tunnel, not everyone experiences an accompanying noise. Many people describe seeing a light at the end of it, which grows brighter as they advance through the tunnel, until they find themselves bathed in its indescribably brilliant radiance. In 1480, the artist Hieronymus Bosch painted this exact scene as part of a larger painting, showing the deceased person being accompanied by an angel as he entered the tunnel, and another being waiting for him at the far end of it. Near the end of her book, On Life After Death, Dr. Kubler-Ross describes her own experience of the light and love of the divine ground. It started with a very fast vibration or pulsation of my abdominal area, which spread through my entire body and then to anything that my eyes could see: the ceiling, the wall, the floor, the furniture, the bed, the window, the horizons outside my window, the trees, and eventually the whole planet Earth. It was as if the whole planet was in a very high-speed vibration. Every molecule vibrated. At the same time, something that looked like a lotus flower bud appeared and opened into an incredible, beautiful, colourful flower. Behind the lotus flower appeared the light that my patients so often talk about. And as I approached this light through the open lotus flower, with a whirl in a deep, fast vibration, I gradually and slowly merged into this incredible, unconditional love. Into this light. I became one with it. Unconditional love often accompanies an NDE, and she describes how soon afterwards, as she went out of her house, she experienced the greatest ecstasy of existence that human beings can ever experience on this physical plane. I was in total love and awe of all life around me. I was in love with every leaf, every cloud, every piece of grass, every living creature. There was, she says, no questioning the validity of this experience. It was simply an awareness of a cosmic consciousness of life in every living thing, and of a love that can never ever be described in words. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross laid the foundation for a new approach to the experience of dying, one that is based on trust instead of fear, and presents the invisible dimension of the cosmos as loving and caring of those who are about to leave this dimension. There is a gentleness, a true feminine compassion, an empathy in her books that is something new. There is also the fierce, passionate strength needed to bring her vision through into a culture which treats old people in retirement homes and people dying in hospital with shocking indifference, even outright cruelty and contempt. Traditionally, women have been the ones who care for the dying, just as they care for the newborn. However, in the past, all the pronouncements on the nature of death and the survival of the soul from whatever religious tradition have been formulated by men. Here, suddenly, is a woman's perspective on death, a woman's experience of the dying and trust in the survival of the soul. Her experiences, as well as those of many others, offer us an opportunity to create a new vision of reality and an enlightened approach to dying that could take humanity into a different understanding of both life and death. On the next to last page of Death, the Final Stage of Growth, she concludes, through her experience of working with the dying for many years, that death is the final stage of growth in life. Only the body dies. The self or spirit, or whatever you may wish to label it, is eternal. Near-death experiences and cardiac arrest. For some years, certain cardiologists have been recording the occurrence of NDEs in cardiac arrest, a state when the patient is confirmed as clinically dead, in a state of unconsciousness caused by lack of oxygen in the brain due to the cessation of circulation and/or breathing. Dr. Pim van Lommel, a cardiologist working in the Netherlands, has recently published a book, 2010, called Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of the Near-Death Experience. He records and comments on the results of a study he set up to investigate this phenomenon in patients who had undergone cardiac arrest and whose experiences while in this unconscious state were recorded under controlled conditions in a number of hospitals. He addressed the question, how can an extremely lucid consciousness be experienced outside the body when the brain has momentarily stopped functioning during a period of clinical death? The findings of the definitive study which answers this question caused an international sensation when it was published in The Lancet in 2001 and suggests that what has been variously named as mind, consciousness, or soul exists as a separate entity from the physical brain, and that an NDE cannot be attributed to imagination, psychosis, epilepsy, or oxygen deprivation. The experience of consciousness should be impossible during cardiac arrest. All measurable electrical activity in the brain has been extinguished, and all bodily and brainstem reflexes are gone. And yet, during this period of total dysfunction, some people experience a heightened and enhanced consciousness known as an NDE. His book should be read by every neuroscientist who is convinced that consciousness begins and ends with the physical brain. I find it one of the most interesting and comprehensive books I've ever read on the subject of the nature of consciousness and the survival of the soul. Dr. Van Lommel quotes a passage from a book by the neurophysiologist John C. Eccles, Evolution of the Brain, Creation of the Self. I maintain that the human mystery is incredibly demeaned by scientific reductionism, with its claim in promissory materialism to account eventually for all of the spiritual world in terms of patterns of neuronal activity. This belief must be classed as superstition. We have to recognize that we are spiritual beings with souls existing in a spiritual world, as well as material beings with bodies and brains existing in a material world. Dr. Van Lommel writes, "It is hard to avoid the conclusion that our endless consciousness preceded birth, and will survive death independently of the body, and in a non-local space where time and place play no role. According to the theory of non-local consciousness, there is no beginning and no end to our consciousness." And he observes that an NDE is both an existential crisis and an intense learning experience. People are transformed by the glimpse of a dimension where time and space play no role, where past and future can be viewed, where they feel complete and healed, and where infinite wisdom and unconditional love can be experienced. These transformations are primarily fueled by the insight that love and compassion for oneself, others, and nature are essential. After an NDE, people realize everything and everybody are connected, that every thought has an impact on oneself and others, and that our consciousness survives physical death. The realization that everything is non-locally connected changes both scientific theories and our image of mankind and the world. His book summarizes what has been learned about different aspects of the near-death experience over the last decades of the 20th century and the first decade of this one. He concludes his groundbreaking book with the words, "It often takes an NDE to get people to think about the possibility of experiencing consciousness independently of the body, and to realize that consciousness has probably always been and always will be, that everything and everybody are connected, that all of our thoughts will exist forever and have an impact on both ourselves and our surroundings, and that death as such does not exist. An NDE provides an opportunity to reconsider our relationship with ourselves, others, and nature, but only if we continue to ask open questions and abandon preconceptions." One of the most recent and interesting of these NDE experiences has been that recounted by Anita Moorjani. Living in Hong Kong, she had been taken to hospital in the last stages of cancer and was expected to die within hours. This is an extract of her experience that I first read on the internet and is now described in her book, Dying to Be Me, 2012. "I was drifting in and out of consciousness during this time, and I could feel my spirit actually leaving my body. I saw and heard conversations between my husband and the doctors taking place outside my room, about 40 feet away down a hallway. Then I actually crossed over to another dimension, where I was engulfed in a total feeling of love. I also experienced with extreme clarity why I had the cancer, why I had come into this life in the first place, what role everyone in my family played in my life in the grand scheme of things, and generally how life works. The clarity and understanding I obtained in this state is almost indescribable. Words seem to limit the experience. I was at a place where I understood how much more there is than what we are able to conceive in our three-dimensional world. I realized what a gift life was, and that I was surrounded by loving spiritual beings who were always around me even when I did not know it. The amount of love I felt was overwhelming. I saw the amazing possibilities we as humans are capable of achieving during a physical life. I found out that my purpose now would be to live heaven on earth, using this new understanding, and also to share this knowing knowledge with other people." Anita found that to her, her family, and her doctor's astonishment, her terminal cancer was completely healed within weeks. She compared her normal experience prior to her NDE with living in a darkened warehouse where she only had a torch to see what was on its shelves. Her NDE experience was like switching on a light where everything in the warehouse could be clearly seen for the first time. Her recently published book has switched on the light for many thousands of people by showing them how her experience changed her understanding of both life and death. In the course of her NDE, she realized that we are all connected. "I realized that the entire universe is alive and infused with consciousness, encompassing all of life and nature. Everything belongs to an infinite whole. I was intricately, inseparably enmeshed with all of life. We're all facets of that unity. We're all one, and each of us has an effect on the collective whole." She tells us to remember our magnificence, and never to doubt for a moment that we are surrounded by love and by loving beings. There is a growing body of material documenting the recorded testimonies of tens of thousands of near-death and out-of-body experiences, as well as the evidence gathered through organizations such as the Alistair Hardy Research Centre in Oxford, and the many videos available on YouTube. In one such video, a neurosurgeon called Dr. Eben Alexander, 2012, describes his experience of a transcendent dimension of reality while he was in a life-threatening coma caused by bacterial meningitis. The coma lasted for 7 days, and during this time the CT scans of his brain showed no activity whatsoever in his neocortex. He had only a 2% chance of survival, and the chance of returning to his normal state was almost zero. Yet, during this absence, he found himself in another dimension of reality. What I saw and learned there has placed me quite literally in a new world, a world where we are much more than our brains and bodies, and where death is not the end of consciousness, but rather a chapter in a vast and incalculably positive journey. He describes what he saw there in a book called Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife, 2012. What is most striking about these experiences is their vivid, precise imagery and the intensity of the emotions generated by them, as well as their capacity to change people's perspective on their existence, giving them a sense that their lives hold a much deeper meaning and value. There is now a subculture formed of thousands of people who have a hunger to know more about these experiences. This hunger would seem to reflect the soul's need for a deeper insight into the meaning of our lives and the creation of a relationship with other dimensions of reality and with loved ones who have left this world. Belief for these people is no longer enough. People want to know and they want to connect. Many thousands of people in indigenous cultures still routinely connect with their ancestors. They consider it perfectly natural and indeed necessary to build ongoing relationships with them for the benefit of the particular group to which they belong, and to align the life of their community with the deeper life of the invisible world. Here is one experience recounted to me by a woman who has practiced shamanic visualization. I have been involved in a formal shamanic training for almost 2 years, and as one of our exercises we journeyed to the moment following our death. I won't go into detail about all that I saw on the other side, but I will say that I came back with a radically different feeling about life on this earth. I did see something of what you describe, the idea that this world is embedded within a vast matrix of cosmic life. One image, metaphor that I received was of myself standing in a still center before rebirth, while around me turned, like a great carousel, entrances to world after world, dimension after dimension, planet after planet. They were all there, and could be accessed at the proper time. For all I know, the possibilities are infinite. During that vision, I saw more clearly than I've ever seen that this is not a flawed, inferior world, as Christianity teaches. We already exist in paradise, if only we had eyes to see it. The beauty of this world is immense and dazzling. I realize that in all my best moments, especially in the natural world, near the ocean, on the mountain top, among the redwoods, in the fields and woods of my childhood, I have felt that oneness, that wholeness, that ecstasy of belonging, that sense of immortality and the eternal, that understanding that all is well at the foundation of the world. I recognized that feeling as I looked through the entrances that led to the borders of all these worlds. Other features of NDEs. Many testimonies describe a being of light who comes to meet them, and who is experienced as loving and embracing them, almost the quintessence of love itself. This is a deeply emotional experience, the memory of which stays with them on their return to their earthly life. Others are met by a close family relative already deceased, or by a dear friend who welcomes and reassures them. Anita Morjani was met by her father and her best friend. A further feature of the NDE is witnessing a life review experienced in a flash, even though the review includes minute details of the experiences, relationships, thoughts and emotions of many years of earth life. People are made aware of all the things they have said and done that have affected others in both a positive and negative sense. Their experience suggests that every thought, every word we utter, every act is somehow recorded. Also, the events that we experience here, as it were in slow motion, are speeded up in that other dimension. Our capacity to view these events and assimilate them is apparently accelerated there. What is so interesting about this particular feature of the modern near-death experience is that it reflects a similar experience in Egyptian times, which gave the Egyptians the mythic image of Osiris as the judge of the dead and weigher of the soul in the scales of the goddess Maat. The Egyptian Book of the Dead shows the soul of the deceased passing through the hall of judgment to be weighed before it passes on to the fields of Ra or the starry world of the Duat. To live one's life in the awareness that we not only survive death, but that every thought, every nuance of relationship, every act is recorded in a deeper dimension of reality, gives a far greater awareness of our responsibility for how we conduct ourselves in our relationship with others, and how far-reaching our words and actions are in affecting the lives and well-being of others. If all our lives and consciousness are connected, then this makes perfect sense. Naturally, people who have been critically injured want to stay in this strange new environment, which is often described as being exquisitely beautiful. However, if their destiny is to return to earth life, they come up against some kind of barrier, or they encounter someone, a deceased family member, or perhaps a being of light, who gives them reasons why they need to go back to care for their family, or to complete their work on earth. The choice is left to them. They accept the need to return to their earth life, although sometimes not without protest, and find themselves back in their physical body, not knowing quite how they return to it. Moving from one dimension to another. There are interesting descriptions in a book called On Dreams and Death by Jung's closest colleague, Marie-Louise Van France, on what it feels like to pass from one dimension to another. She writes, "All of the dreams of people who are facing death indicate the unconscious that is our instinct world, prepares consciousness not for a definite end, but for a profound transformation and for a kind of continuation of the life process, which, however, is unimaginable to everyday consciousness. The image of light appears more often than any other image in our quoted material. Jung has expressed the assumption that psychic reality might lie on a supraluminous level of frequency, that is, it could exceed the speed of light. One of the accounts she cites is that of a man who was thought to have been clinically dead for 23 minutes. I was moving very quickly toward a bright, shining net, which vibrated like a remarkable cold energy at the intersection points of its radiant strands. The net was like a lattice which I did not want to break through. For a brief moment my forward movement seemed to slow down, but then I was in the lattice. As I came in touch with it, the light flickering increased to such an intensity that it consumed and at the same time transformed me. I felt no pain. The feeling was neither agreeable nor disagreeable, but it filled me completely. From then on, everything was different. This can be described only very incompletely. The whole thing was like a transformer, an energy transformer which transported me into a formlessness beyond time and space. I was not in another place, for spatial dimensions had been abolished, but rather in another state of being." She cites another observation, that of an architect named Stefan von Jankovic. "One of the greatest discoveries I made during death was the oscillation principle. Since that time, God represents for me a source of primal energy, inexhaustible and timeless, continually radiating energy, absorbing energy, and constantly pulsating. Different worlds are formed from different oscillations. The frequencies determine the differences. Therefore, it is possible for different worlds to exist simultaneously in the same place, since the oscillations that do not correspond with each other also do not influence themselves. Thus, birth and death can be understood as events in which, from one oscillation frequency and therefore from one world, we come into another." Healing the trauma of bereavement. Many bereaved people have the experience of seeing their loved ones appearing to them or communicating with them in some way after their death. Others feel a very strong presence of that person in their lives, as if they were still close to them, even close enough to have a dialogue with them. They can feel the presence of the other even if they cannot see them with their physical eyes. Often, synchronicities are noticed. Sogyal Rinpoche gives a most helpful practice for sending rays of light and compassionate love to a loved one, which can help them if they are in a state of fear and bewilderment after a traumatic death. One of the most interesting initiatives with regard to assuaging the trauma of bereavement is explored in a book by Dr. Alan L. Botkin called Induced After-Death Communication, 2005. Using the EMDR technique, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, which has been used with great effectiveness in treating veterans with PTSD, he has developed a method of treating the trauma of bereavement by taking this method to a further stage, which results in the actual manifestation of the individual who has died or been killed. The bereaved individual finds that he or she can see the dead person and sometimes talk to him or her. At first hesitant to tell colleagues about this new development and its potential for healing the trauma of bereavement, Dr. Botkin found that his growing experience increased his trust and confidence in this method. He brings many case histories to show the effectiveness of this groundbreaking new method of treating bereavement, and also refers to cases of veterans who have seen comrades killed or who have killed others in combat and carry deep guilt because of this. Being able to talk to these deceased men and realize that those whom they thought were dead are alive and well removes the enormous burden of grief and guilt they may have carried for years. I wonder whether our world and the worlds or dimensions we cannot see exist as levels in the vast electromagnetic vibrational field of the universe, where each level is vibrating at a different rate. It appears that the world of the living dead moves at a different vibratory rate than the physical matter of our world. Occasionally, in some way we don't yet understand, these different levels come close to or overlap with each other, or perhaps our field of consciousness expands, so that we have a glimpse, a brief connection, before we are returned to our usual state. In a talk he gave on angels, the artist, the late Cecil Collins, said, "Perhaps there are not two things, spirit and matter, but different degrees of one reality, different degrees of vibrations on a scale from the lower end of vibrations we call matter to the higher, the vibration and radiance of the world of light, which is the world of angels. We see according to our place on the scale of vibrations." Summary of the worlds or dimensions beyond ours. 1. We are immortal, and we retain our individuality after our death. 2. As described in chapter 15, there are literally millions of unseen worlds, planes or dimensions inhabited by countless numbers of souls, but there appear to be three basic levels of reality: our physical world, an intermediate multi-dimensional soul world, and a level that is beyond description, which represents what may be called the divine world. Some souls reincarnate into this material world, others don't. There seems to be a possibility for souls to circulate between many of these different worlds or dimensions of reality. 3. There is no specific heaven or hell to which people can be consigned indefinitely, but there are states of being which can be compared to these. The words Summerland and Shadowlands are often mentioned in communications from the other side. There is always the possibility of help being given to more advanced souls, to those who are in denser, more unconscious states, and who have the choice of responding to the help that is offered. 4. It is not what we believe, but how we live our lives here that draws us to the plane we will inhabit there. No Saviour accomplishes our redemption for us. We save, redeem, and heal ourselves through the care and service we give to others and to life, because we have the innate capacity to do so, and because we carry divinity within us as part of the innate divinity of all life. Underlying and permeating this plethora of worlds or dimensions is the light and love of the divine ground which emanates from the highest plane and animates and sustains all worlds, all levels of reality. The cosmic ground of being is described as an immeasurable ocean of light and love. Our world is permeated and sustained by this cosmic light and love, but we cannot see it or feel it. We and everything on this planet are the embodiment, the creation of that light and love. Light in the higher worlds does not come from the sun, but from this ineffable source of light. The closer the zones or spheres are to the source, the more radiant they are, and the finer their vibrational frequency. The beauty of these higher, inner, or finer zones is indescribable. A communication recorded in a most interesting book written by a lawyer, Edward C. Randall, first published in 1922 and republished in 2010, called Frontiers of the Afterlife, says, "Our world is composed of matter as real and definite as your own, but that matter vibrates at a higher rate. Consequently, your undeveloped senses can have but little cognizance of it, and your own sphere being composed of matter at a low rate of vibration, it is almost equally as difficult for us to manifest on your plane as it is for you to penetrate ours. The principle of cooperation between the two planes is what we desire to establish, for this principle of cooperation is an essential condition for the development of the consciousness from your low and stagnant vibrations to those that are higher and healthier and more in keeping with the spirit's deepest longing, more in harmony with that process that is working for the ultimate and absolute destiny of the evolving spirit of man." 3 bodies. According to the many communications that have been received about the nature of our existence in this transcendent reality, each of us has several bodies, corresponding to the 3 orders of reality described above and in chapter 15. The physical plane of reality, the intermediate plane of the subtle forms of the soul worlds, and finally the plane of spirit or pure light beyond form. Corresponding with these 3 orders of reality: 1. We have a physical body for this material world. 2. We have a soul body composed of much finer particles than the physical body, but resembling it exactly. At the point of death, this soul body emerges from the physical body and is connected to it by a silver cord. Death ensues when the silver cord is severed from the physical body. When we discard the physical body, our soul body comes into its own, and we discover, to our surprise, that we are not dead, but very much alive in a body which has the same features as our old one, but in a more youthful and healthy state. In this soul body we can see and hear as before, only more intensely. We can communicate with others telepathically, and have instantaneous access to the thoughts of others, as well as to places or people whom we wish to see or communicate with. This soul body can create form through thought and imagination alone, without the need for speech. To some extent, we can visit other planes of that subtle reality, but we cannot visit the highest realms of the spirit world for very long, until our soul vibrations are attuned to the very fine vibrations of that plane of reality. 3. Within the soul body, we have a spirit body, or a sequence of bodies consisting of even finer particles which correspond to the higher levels of the spirit world. These are gradually unveiled or entered into as we draw closer and closer to the light of the divine ground. Those who don't realize they are dead, or who cling to the memories and habits of their earthly life, may remain in the denser, darker regions known as the Shadowlands, because of the harm they did to others or to themselves, or because of fixed beliefs imprinted during their earthly lives, or their inability to realize that they have died and are in another dimension of reality. For anyone who is convinced that death is the end of consciousness, it is a shock to realize that he or she is still conscious, and it takes time to adjust to this realization. Our culture encourages addictions of all kinds, and when they die, people may remain trapped in these. But with help from those in higher spheres, they can move towards the light. Stillborn children and children who died young are apparently cared for by loving adults and are reunited with their parents when the time comes for them to make the transition. When any individual on earth or here omits doing something that he feels and knows he should do, the whole creation feels the loss. Whereas, when we do something that adds grandeur and stature to life, the whole created universe gains from that action. It can make you shiver inside to know and appreciate how far-reaching a thought or deed or word of any person can be. This statement recalls the net of Indra described in chapter 15. In relation to the clarity of vision and freedom of movement that seem to characterize life in the subtle dimensions of reality, we, in this physical dimension, are living in a diminished or restricted existence, enclosed like an oyster in its shell, as Plato put it in his Phaedrus. The forms of life in the spirit world. The forms of the intermediate soul worlds and the higher spirit worlds are prototypes of the forms of this world, only more beautiful and extraordinary, just as Plato and the Sufi mystics have described them. In these worlds are mountains, oceans, rivers, lakes, rocks, trees and flowers, animals, wonderful birds and exquisite butterflies. Everything is as real and familiar to the inhabitants of these worlds as the forms of this planet are to us. But there we don't need to eat, to earn our living, to procreate, nor do we need to defend ourselves against attack. We can move about freely in our soul or spirit bodies, and so we don't need concrete roads, cars, trains, aeroplanes. We don't need oil or electricity. We can communicate telepathically by thought alone, so we don't need mobiles. Above all, we don't need money or banks, because we can create the houses, furnishings, and gardens we would like to live in, with the imagination alone. There is plenty to do in these worlds. We can continue with the pursuits that interested us in this world, cultivate gardens, create houses for ourselves, imagine, invent, explore, discover, and generally develop ourselves, as well as help those lost in denser, darker regions to move out of them. Here are houses, magnificent temples, great cities, schools, wonderful universities and libraries, places for the scientists and astronomers to study the universe, for artists and craftsmen to create beauty, for writers to write, for teachers to teach, for musicians to play instruments. Beautiful music is one of the features most often commented on. Music can apparently create form. There are hospitals where people can rest and recover as they adjust to their new environment. New discoveries can be made which can be communicated to scientists on Earth if they will listen. The subtle body. In 1919, G.R.S. Mead, translator of major works of Egyptian and Neoplatonic philosophy, and the then-known Gnostic texts, published his doctrine of the subtle body in Western tradition. This revealed, as the introduction to a new edition published in 2005 says, that there is and always has been an esoteric tradition in the West, as well as in the East, concerning the subtle body of man. This would seem to correspond to what is generally referred to as the soul in the Christian tradition. But the concept of the soul as the subtle body we inhabit after death was never developed by Christian theology and offered to the culture as a whole. So the pre-existent teaching about the survival of consciousness after the death of the body, derived from Egypt and subsequently from the Platonic school in Athens and the Neoplatonism of Plotinus, was virtually lost. Mead writes of the subtle body, "Conjectures concerning it vary with every stage of culture and differ within every stage, but the underlying conception invariably holds its ground and makes good its claim to be one of the most persistent persuasions of mankind in all ages and climes." Even in 1919, he could write in words that are unfortunately as applicable to our day nearly 100 years later as they were for his. It is, however, the prevailing habit of the sceptical rationalism of the present day to dismiss summarily all such beliefs of antiquity as the baseless dreams of a pre-scientific age, and to dump them indiscriminately into the midden of exploded superstitions. But this particular superstition, I venture to think, cannot be justly disposed of in so contemptuous a fashion. Mead anticipated that physicists would one day discover the existence of subtle energy fields, and would therefore be able to prove the existence of the subtle body using their own methodology. I think they are on the verge of doing so today in their discovery of dark matter. Many writers of earlier culture speak variously of a subtle body, a resurrection body, St. Paul, a celestial body, a shining body, a radiant body, an ethereal or etheric body, an astral or starry body. In the 16th century, an alchemist who goes by the unforgettable name of Ruland the lexicographer identifies the faculty of the imagination itself with the subtle body when he writes, "Imagination is the star in man, the celestial and supercelestial body. These different bodies, or sheaths, were believed by different cultures to exist within or to surround and enfold the physical body when it incarnates in this earthly dimension. When we discard the body, our subtle or soul body comes into its own, and we discover to our surprise that we are not dead, but still very much alive."
One of the most beautiful descriptions of the subtle body is to be found in the hymn of the robe of glory, or hymn of the pearl, as it is known. Believed to have been written by a Gnostic called Bardesanes, who lived in Edessa in the 3rd century AD, and originally translated by Mead, it tells the story of the soul taking leave of her father and mother in the heavenly realms, her descent into mortality, her lapse into forgetfulness of her divine origin, her receiving a message from the divine realms, her awakening and seizure of a pearl from the jaws of a great dragon or serpent, and her return to the source from which she came, where she is finally clothed in a robe of glory and received into the kingdom. The vibrant words of this short extract from the poem translated by Mead describe the soul clothed with the robe of glory, or body of light. My bright embroidered robe, which with glorious colours, with gold and with beryls, and rubies and agates, and sardonyxes varied in colour, and like the sapphire stone also were its manifold hues. I hastened that I might take it, and me too, my loved, urged on, that I should run to meet it and receive it. And I stretched forth and received it. With the beauty of its colours I adorned myself, and in my royal robe, of brilliant colours I clothed myself therewith, and ascended to the gate of salutation and homage.
The transition. These beautiful lines written by the 16th century poet John Donne in his poem Hymn to God, My God, awaken deep reflection on the moment of transition when we move from this dimension into another. Since I am coming to that holy room, where with thy choir of saints for evermore I shall be made thy music. As I come, I tune the instrument here at the door, and what I must do then, think here before. How do we tune the instrument of our being to the music of the cosmos? Even the act of reflecting on this gentle metaphor of communion or reunion may help to quieten the turmoil of our thoughts, bring to mind what is most important to us, how we might refine our being. Too often those who are dying may find themselves intensely alone and afraid at the moment when they are in the greatest need of comfort and support. If they have been wounded in battle or involved in a car accident, they may have been rushed to hospital and the intensive care unit. Doctors and nurses may be busily engaged in trying to prolong the moments of their life when, Sensing the approach of death, all they want is to be able to prepare for the moment of transition and have another kindly human being sitting by them, perhaps holding their hand. In the final days, hours, and minutes of our lives, we may experience strong feelings, fear and uncertainty about what is to come, regret about things we may have done or were not able to do, bitterness at the suffering we may have endured or caused, deep sadness that we were unable to do more, that our lives have been cut short, the longing to communicate all that we were unable to say to loved ones, above all, to express the love we felt and feel for them. It helps greatly if those feelings can be shared with someone who can spare the time to listen to us. Those who do quietly sit and listen in empathic companionship, even when a person has lost consciousness, may become aware that just before the person dies, a deep feeling of peace and serenity pervades the room. In the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, Sogyal Rinpoche asks us to live our lives in awareness of this moment of death, so that when it comes, we are able to relinquish the pressing concerns of the personality and focus on reunion with the source from which we have come. This source, in the Tibetan tradition as in others, is conceived of as a great light, the clear light of the void. Whatever effort we can make in our last moments to free ourselves from the powerful emotions, regrets, and concerns that may have ruled our lives will ease our transition from one level of reality to another. With death approaching, it is important, where possible, to resolve old problems of relationship with others, to let go of old angers, jealousies, resentments, and fears, to be reconciled with people from whom we have become alienated, to speak lovingly and reassuringly to parents or children from whom we have become separated. Summary of the stages of the transition. There are feelings of peace, bliss, intense happiness, and awareness of no more pain. Separation from the body, a sense of weightlessness, like taking off a diving suit. Going through a tunnel, a rushing, roaring noise. Seeing a bright light and feeling a magnetic pull towards it. Someone coming to meet us, a close relative or a being of light. Many testimonies describe a being of light who comes to meet them and who is experienced as loving and embracing, almost the quintessence of love itself. Others are met by a close family relative or a dear friend already deceased who welcomes and reassures them. The feeling of being embraced or surrounded by overwhelming, unconditional love. Sometimes a life review. Restoration to a perfect state of health, eyesight, hearing, limbs. Even those who have had MS or who have been blind, deaf, or paralyzed. Then, as quietly as the dawn meets morning, the separation comes. Out of the housing of the flesh, the inner body emerges, and it is welcomed by those who have gone before. This is the second birth, so, like the first, except that all the knowledge, individuality, and spirituality gained in our earth life is retained, and we live on in the fullness of our mentality and strength as before. Dissolution neither adds to nor subtracts from the sum total of our knowledge. The inner body in which we have functioned, we shall still function in for all eternity.
Nothing is more important for our well-being than to know that when we die, we move into another reality that is as real and vitally alive as this one. Consciousness does not die with the death of the body. Consciousness is eternal. A few years ago, a manuscript came into my hands called The Miracle of Death. I wrote a foreword to it because I felt it could help many bereaved people to trust in the survival of their loved ones. Betty J. Kovacs, the author, who lost first a son and then a husband in car accidents 2.5 years apart, describes how, out of a sustained meditative attention, there was born in her not only a deeper capacity for insight, but the opening of her awareness. She writes, to a dimension so vast that I was stunned to realize how excruciatingly small a space I had been trained to live in and call reality. What she experienced as her awareness of this dimension expanded was the shattering of the myth of materialism, which condemns so many to a meaningless life of mediocrity, addiction, violence, indifference, and fanaticism. The message of her book is one of hope and trust that we will be able to open ourselves to the experience of the mysteries of the cosmos and weave these mysteries into our daily lives, and by so doing, heal the deep fragmentation in our souls. On the last page of her book, she writes, as we reconnect full circle to the roots of our existence in the mind of the universe, we experience the deep unity of birth and death and the radical creativity of both. We understand that death is as divine as life, because it is life, because there is nothing but life. Chapter 20. Light and Love as the Pulse of the Cosmos. The flute of the infinite is played without ceasing, and its sound is love. Kabir. Love is the inner, the universal, the cosmic self. Swami Muktananda. The heart is nothing but the sea of light, the place of the vision of God. Rumi, the Mathnavi. He who sees that the Lord of all is ever the same in all that is, immortal in the field of mortality, he sees the truth. And when a man sees that the God in himself is the same God in all that is, he hurts not himself by hurting others. Then he goes indeed to the highest path. Bhagavad Gita 13:27-28. The day will come when, after harnessing the ether, the winds, the tides, gravitation, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And on that day, for the second time in the history of the world, human beings will have discovered far. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Toward the Future. This book has been written with love of life, love of the beauty, wonder, and sacredness of the earth and all its incredible species, love of humanity and the sublime expressions of its creative spirit and indomitable courage, love of my family and my close friends, and love of the mystery of the cosmos, both visible and invisible, whose life I serve. In the course of writing it and following the thread of my dreams, I have been able to answer the question, who am I?, posed so long ago by Sri Ramana Maharshi, and to a small extent discover the nature of the soul, whose immense reach into unseen dimensions I had no idea of when I started out on my journey 70 years ago. My quest has been guided by the archetype of the feminine, which has held no place of honor in Western civilization, whether as nature, soul, or matter. I have taken as my mentors the great mystics of all traditions, as well as Jung, because he, more than anyone in the last century, recovered for us the neglected dimension of the soul. I have also, as far as I am able, tried to honor the discoveries of the great scientists which are transforming our view of the universe, this planet, and ourselves. But although love and a passionate desire to fathom the reason for our presence on this planet and the causes of our suffering have informed all my writing, I have had only one experience in my life that I would describe as one of cosmic love. This experience when I was 60 years old is precious, because it is not often in the course of a life that a glimpse of the eternal breaks through the cloud of our earthbound consciousness. It felt like the sun coming out after a winter of darkness, a warm, enveloping feeling of intense and unconditional love, which flowed through me like a river of gold towards every person I met, folding them in its embrace. It lasted for about 10 days. It was as if a dam in my heart had burst and the water of love poured out onto the world. I was simply the vehicle of that love. How, I wondered, could this ecstatic experience, which came and went without warning, change my understanding of life and my relationships with other people? How could I attune myself to this incandescent power within all of us, which could transform the way we see and relate to each other and to the earth, our planetary home? We are the inheritors of an immensely rich spiritual tradition, from the Christian West, from India, Persia, the Middle East, and elsewhere, which speaks of love as the pulse of the cosmos and the secret pulse of our own being. The exquisite poetry of this tradition, which includes the Divine Comedy, the Upanishads, the poems of Rumi and Kabir, and the Song of Songs, speaks of the longing of the human heart for reconnection with its source, but also the longing of that source for communion with ourselves. I was a treasure longing to be known. That is why I created the world, says a hadith from the Quran. The inner life of the cosmos can only communicate through those individuals during the millennia of our human experience on this planet who have become receptive to its presence. We only know of the existence and nature of this cosmic ground of being through the men and women who have spoken of their experience of it. Some have described it as Father, as Christ did, others as Mother, as the Taoists and the Indian sage Ramakrishna did. Some describe it as cosmic love, others as creative intelligence or sacred mind. Mystics know it as the divine ground of being. People who have had a near-death experience describe it as both light and unconditional love. The writings of the world's greatest mystics and spiritual teachers, as well as these personal testimonies, affirm that light and love are the fundamental principles of the universe. The universe we see and marvel at is brought into being and sustained by light and love. We sail the fragile vessel of our consciousness on the surface of this fathomless sea of light and love, not knowing that we are, in essence, what we seek. A master of the Tibetan Tantric path says, "The luminous, awakened mind is always present. We have simply to recognize it." The secret intention of the life that lives us, the secret dream of the cosmos, is to bring us to the discovery that we belong to this divine ground, that we are it, even though we have no awareness of this. The temple of our body is created and sustained by this ground. When the body dies, our consciousness discovers its identity with this eternal ground. As the Bhagavad Gita tells us, thine own consciousness, shining, void, and inseparable from the great body of radiance, hath no birth nor death, and is the immutable light. All traditions say that, as Blake understood, the doors of our perception have to be cleansed before we can see and experience the full radiance of that ground. A passage from the Zohar says that when a man has been shut up in darkness for a long time, a tiny opening has to be made for him at first, and then another, a little larger, and another larger still, until he can bear the full radiance of the light. Then the eye of the heart and the eye of the mind can be opened to the revelation that we are in our essential being eternally one with that light and love. In the Indian Vedic texts, which may be the remnants of an oral tradition from a lost civilization buried beneath the waters of the Great Flood, we hear the answers to the questions arising from the heart of a people who lived long before us. There was not then what is or what is not. There was no sky and no heaven beyond the sky. What power was there? Where? Who was that power? Was there an abyss of fathomless waters? There was neither death nor immortality then. There were no signs of night or day. The One was breathing by its own power in infinite peace. Only the One was. There was nothing beyond. And in the One arose love, love the first seed of the soul. The truth of this the sages found in their hearts. Seeking in their hearts with wisdom, the sages found that bond of union between being and non-being. Later, in the Upanishads, Brahman, the supreme reality that is named in the Vedas as Purusha, is described as truth and love, eternal spirit, both transcendent and immanent, dwelling beyond all and within all that we can know or apprehend. In part of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, 5th Brahmana, honey is used as a metaphor to describe how all things, all elements of creation, are contained within and sustained by the divine ground. This self is the honey of all beings, and all beings are the honey of this self. While speaking of the Upanishads, I would like to mention the story of one of the great Sufi mystics, Prince Dara Shikoh, 1615 to 1659, who is not well known in the West. He was the eldest son of the Emperor Shah Jahan and his beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal, for whom he built the peerless Taj Mahal. A poet, scholar, and mystic who spent many years studying with two of the greatest Sufi sages of that time. While in Kashmir in 1640, he heard of the Upanishads and had 50 of them and other Sanskrit texts, including the Bhagavad Gita, translated into Persian. Wanting to show the close relationship between Islam and these great Vedic texts, Prince Dara wrote a beautiful and profound treatise called The Confluence of the Two Seas, Majma al-Bahrain, also known as the Mingling of the Two Oceans. In this great contribution to comparative religion, he attempted to show how Hinduism and Islam were of the same essence, transmitting the same teaching. In it he wrote, "All that you see as other than God is one with God in essence, though separate in name. When you transcend ordinary consciousness, you will realize that everything is God, and it will inevitably follow that you will know yourself as you are in reality. You will no longer remain within the confines of the consciousness of I and you. It is here that you will find the truth of unity." In 1646, he wrote one of the most profound Sufi treatises called The Compass of Truth, a detailed guide to the transcendent realms of the soul. But in 1658, in a brutal coup organized by his younger brother Aurangzeb, and backed by the orthodox mullahs who disapproved of his treatises and accused him of apostasy, Prince Dara was captured and beheaded, with his head sent to his imprisoned and grief-stricken father. By this tragic blow of fate, he never became the rightful ruler of the Mughal Empire. He would perhaps have ruled India as a philosopher king, following the example of his grandfather Akbar, who had united Hindus and Muslims under the principle of universal peace. He might have been able to hold together the followers of the two great religions, who have now split apart into two different nations, poised to strike each other with their nuclear weapons. From the time I travelled in India and heard the story of this remarkable prince, I have always felt drawn to him, and for this reason have paid tribute to him here. Prince Dara would have understood the profound message of the Bhagavad Gita and the bond of love between the divine ground and the human soul that is enshrined in its peerless poetry. There, Krishna says to Arjuna, "Only through constant love can I be known and seen as I really am and entered into." And at the end, repeating his earlier instruction to follow the path of love, he says, "Fix your mind on me, give thy heart's love to me, consecrate all thy actions to my service, hold thine own self as nothing before me. To me, then thou shalt come, truly I promise, for thou art dear to me." In the later Buddhist texts, we hear the Buddha's teaching about how to clear the mind of all that clouds the luminosity of the clear light of the void, so that we may become vehicles of the compassion that radiates like the sun from the source of life. In the Christian tradition, we hear the voice of Christ. God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. 1 John 4:16. And the great commandment he gave to his disciples on the eve of his passion. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you too must love one another. John 13:34-35 and 15:12. In the Gnostic Gospel of Eve, we hear the beautiful words which could be those of the Holy Spirit, or equally those of the Shekinah of Kabbalah. I am thou, and thou art I, and wheresoever thou art, I am there, and I am sown, or scattered in all things, and from whensoever thou willest, thou gatherest me, but in gathering me, thou gatherest thyself. Mystics of all traditions have spoken of their encounter with the cosmic love of the divine ground, and none more beautifully than Julian of Norwich, 1342 to 1416. Thus I learned that love is our Lord's meaning, and I saw full surely in this and in everything else that before God made us, he loved us, and that love was never ended, nor ever shall be. And in this love he has performed all his actions. He has made all things profitable to us. And in this love our life is everlasting. In our making we had our beginning, but the love wherein he made us is without beginning. And all this shall we see in God without end. The different traditions I have referred to, as well as modern testimonies to the existence of this deeper ground of consciousness, and the many accounts of the near-death experience, tell us that love and light, as the pulse of the cosmos, flow to us in the creation and becoming of our own lives, holding this world of time in the embrace of the eternal. The words of the great Flemish Christian mystic, John of Ruysbroek, 1273 to 1381, offer the essence of this embrace. When love has carried us above all things, we receive in peace the incomprehensible light, enfolding us and penetrating us. What is this light, if it be not a contemplation of the infinite and an intuition of eternity? We behold that which we are, and we are that which we behold, because our being, without losing anything of its own personality, is united with the divine truth. Truly, with all these traditions, each of which connects us with the light and love of the divine ground, we have been offered a feast. Who has been preparing this feast, if not cosmic intelligence, or the Holy Spirit, or divine mind working through centuries and millennia and the souls of countless individuals to awaken our slumbering consciousness to awareness of its radiant ground and our profound connection with each other? Truth, wrote Teilhard de Chardin near the end of his life, has to appear only once in one single mind, for it to be impossible for anything ever to prevent it from spreading universally and setting everything ablaze. Perhaps we have reached the point in our evolution where a new truth, a new revelation of the whole of life as a divine unity could be born in our hearts. The realization that we are part of the divinity we have worshipped for millennia as something separate from ourselves and from the life of this world. There is no essential distinction between transcendent and immanent spirit. As the mystics have always told us, the distinction and the duality are in our incomplete perception of reality. The divine is what we are. We are internally in the divine. This was known long ago to the alchemists, a vision of reality they called stellar consciousness, which reflected their astounding experience of the lost sense of the unity and divinity of all life. How could we define the feeling of love? In my experience, it is associated with a feeling of bliss, an ecstatic joy, an upwelling of a feeling that exists prior to any conception of what that feeling might pertain to. It may well up suddenly and unexpectedly as we awaken from sleep, and we may lie in bed immersed in it as we return from communion with a deeper ground to the focus of our daily lives. It may express itself as ecstatic emotional and sexual union with a beloved partner. It may be experienced as the love of a parent for a newborn child, or a grandparent's delight in watching a beloved child grow in strength until he or she reaches maturity. Anyone who has created something wrought from the heart with love and patience will know it. A scientist or doctor who has discovered or invented something of immense value to humanity, such as the Salk vaccine for polio, may experience it. The athletes who, after years of dedication to their sport, achieve a medal in the Olympics, know it as tears of pride and joy well into their eyes. A verse from one of the Upanishads says, "And then he saw that Brahman was joy, for from joy all beings have come. By joy they all live, and unto joy they all return." How does this capacity for joy, for love, for ecstasy awaken in us? First of all, it arises through the blissful experience of the infant's relationship with its mother. Look at the face of a newly born infant that has been delivered with all the care, attention, and love shown by two outstanding physicians, Frederic Leboyer and Michel Audin, in their sensitive approach to childbirth. Watch how it responds instinctively to its mother's touch, feel, scent, and loving gaze. As the child grows up, trust may be one of the fruits of this primary love and care, the mutual trust between child and parent that leads her to trust life, other people, herself. Later, we know it through our own experience as the feeling that spontaneously arises in us when we suddenly feel an intense love for someone close to us, perhaps fused with anguish at the moment of saying goodbye to them, at the moment of death. Or we may feel it as an intense attraction to a place or the memory of a place. During the course of our life, joy may manifest through some kind of activity that attracts us and arouses our passionate interest, that draws us to develop a talent, a skill of some kind, through which we can express our essential nature, basically our passion to create, to love. It manifests in our relationships, our ability to trust others and to give love to them and receive love from them, often sustained through the most difficult circumstances. It may come through the discovery that we can help others in some way, that we enjoy helping others, perhaps people we will never meet, that we can help in some tangible way to alleviate the suffering of the world. Intense love is found in the bond between warriors facing death on the battlefield, in the care of a parent or grandparent for a child. It may be discovered in the feeling that our heart is bursting with longing to stand with people who are suffering in the aftermath of a tsunami, earthquake, devastating drought, or volcanic eruption, or bursting with grief for those who are facing terrible persecution, torture, imminent death, to alleviate their suffering in some tangible way. Love may also arise in our heart when we can truly see something clearly for the first time with fresh eyes, as when we saw our planet from the depths of space, as the astronaut Edgar Mitchell did when he wrote these words on his journey home from the moon. Gazing through 240,000 miles of space towards the stars and the planet from which I had come, I suddenly experienced the universe as intelligent, loving, harmonious. The presence of divinity became almost palpable, and I knew that life in the universe was not just an accident based on random processes. Time is needed to reflect on and absorb all these and more aspects of love. Time to become conscious of the power and intelligence of the energy that is living through us and in us. Time to open the eye of the heart to awareness of its unconditional love. I am reminded of the story of Martha and Mary in the New Testament. Martha caught in the net of the preoccupations of everyday life. Mary sitting in stillness, listening to the symphony of a deeper reality. If we trust the word of the mystics and those who have broken through our limited consciousness to the divine ground, love is the great holding, connecting power of the universe. It is so difficult for us to realize that our life is an expression of that love, that everything we are and do flows from that love. All our relationships, our creative endeavors, our hopes, our longings, our fears and failures, even the wounds inflicted by our cruelties and hatreds, exist within that vast ocean of love. Teilhard de Chardin could help us here in the words that he wrote in his Hymn of the Universe. Humanity has been sleeping and still sleeps, lulled within the narrowly confining joys of its little closed loves. In the depths of the human multitude there slumbers an immense spiritual power which will manifest itself only when we have learned how to break through the dividing walls of our egoism and raise ourselves up to an entirely new perspective so that habitually and in a practical fashion we fix our gaze on universal realities. And again, in the words that he wrote in his essay, The Spirit of the Earth, written in 1931, love is the most universal, the most tremendous, the most mysterious of the cosmic forces. Is it truly possible for humanity to continue to live and grow without asking itself how much truth and energy it is losing by neglecting its incredible powers of love? What about the propensity for evil, for hatred and cruelty? I think these are born of fear and self-hatred, from the belief that we are not loved, not lovable, that we have been abandoned on this planet, that our lives have no meaning, value, or purpose, that a death awaits us that will extinguish the memory of everything we have been, everything we have loved. They are born of the terrible wounds inflicted in childhood by neglect, abandonment, abysmal cruelty, and the experience of unbearable pain or loss, the breaking of a child's trusting, loving heart. They are born from self-rejection, from ignorance of who and what we are, and a distortion of our nature caused by past and present beliefs that live deep in our unconscious, unrecognized and untransformed. Children who have been rescued from unimaginable suffering inflicted by cruelty, horror, or neglect can be healed by the loving attention of an adult. The Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh had this to say about love as the ability to contain anger and the desire for vengeance. After 9/11, he said, "If I were given the opportunity to be face to face with Osama bin Laden, the first thing I would do is listen. I would try to understand all of the suffering that had led him to violence, because such an act of violence is a desperate call for attention and for help. The love flowing to us from the cosmos can act more effectively through us as our capacity to feel empathy for the suffering of others expands." Thich Nhat Hanh exemplifies in his life and his teaching that empathic understanding which could bring about healing at the international level if we were able to embody it in our relations with others. Paul Hawken, in his book Blessed Unrest, has described the impulse to heal and to help arising in the millions of people who are engaged in countless initiatives to help others and to help the planet. There are many old and new methods of healing that are being rediscovered and implemented. In relation to my own profession of psychotherapy, I treasure these words of a counselor called Brian Thorne. "There are moments in my work as a therapist when I feel outside time and space and cannot conceive that heaven itself could be more desirable. They are characterized both for my client and me by a sense of radical, unconditioned, unearned acceptance, and by an empowerment within that makes us capable, however briefly, of loving the whole created order. In short, we have ourselves been swept up into the divine relationship. For a moment, however fleeting, we are whole and holy, fully human, and therefore the incarnation of the divine. I believe that we therapists have an opportunity to affect the course of human history if we can but seize the moment. We are the guardians of knowledge given us by countless suffering individuals who seek our help. It is not fanciful to see the counselors and therapists of our day as the chief recipients of the collective pain and yearning of the age. This is a treasure beyond price, but its value lies in its capacity, if fully revealed and articulated, to give meaning to present distress and to provide hope and guidance for the future. Healing the wounded heart of humanity is about cherishing in every sense. cherishing our own lives as having infinite meaning and value, cherishing the time given to us in order to discover our true direction in life and who we truly are, cherishing the body which has been sacrificed for so long to our distorted image of spirituality, cherishing the lives of the people who have been given into our care, cherishing the planetary life which is the great field of all our endeavors. Love calls to us to caring, solicitude, insight, gentleness, and understanding, but also to strength, power, and intelligence used in the service of humanity and all species on the planet. It calls us to make conscious and contain the desire for power, control, and dominance that are rooted in the opposite of love, in fear. In her wonderful and inspiring book, Songlines of the Soul, Pathways to a New Vision for a New Century, Veronica Goodchild writes, "In the breakdown of ordinary reality as we know it, a different kind of gnosis is occurring all around us. At the turn of the eon, it brings us a new kind of knowledge, revealed rather than rational knowledge, that wishes to make itself felt. This disclosure hints at the union of soul and life in a revelation of love, our human love, and the love of the cosmos for us. Held within this larger perspective, we come to know what not only the ancients, the mystics, the Gnostics, and the alchemists once knew, but also what we know today through our dreams, visions, and anomalous experiences, which perhaps we have kept secret for too long, but which now cry out for each of us to add to the chorus that is singing the songlines of the soul." The image of light. Everything that I have written in this book seems to converge on the image of light, a light that is different from the light of the sun, and comes from a supernal source, a light that is the unseen creative ground of our consciousness and the world of physical reality. So, in this last chapter, I would like to draw together images of light from three different sources: the light of the quantum vacuum discovered by science, the ineffable light described by mystical experience and by those who have gone beyond our usual way of seeing, and finally, the description of an encounter with the light in an astonishing out-of-the-body experience. The discoveries of quantum physics tell us that we are literally bathed in a cosmic sea of light, invisible to us, yet permeating and sustaining every cell of our being, every atom of matter. At the quantum level, all apparently separate aspects of life are connected in one invisible and indivisible whole. All life at the deepest level is essentially one. In the words of astrophysicist Bernard Heisch, the deep connection between physics and metaphysics lies in the fact that the electromagnetic quantum vacuum is a form of light. It is an underlying sea of energy that permeates every tiny volume of space, from the emptiest intergalactic void to the depths of the earth, the sun, or our own bodies. In this sense, our world of matter is like the visible foam atop a very deep ocean of light. The metaphysical descriptions of the light. There are numerous metaphysical descriptions of cosmic light encountered in the near-death experience. The earliest is found in the Upanishads, where Brahman is described as the radiant light of lights, whose radiance illumines all creation. In the Christian tradition, there is a remarkably consistent description in the first three Gospels of the transfiguration of Jesus that was witnessed by three of the disciples, Peter, James, and John. These are found in Matthew 17, 2-9, Mark 9, 2-9, and Luke 9, 28-36. Jesus is described in the Gospel of Matthew with his face shining like the sun and his clothes as white as the light. There is another, less-known description of the Transfiguration, recorded in a Gnostic manuscript called the Pistis Sophia, thought to date, although there is some dispute about this, from the first half of the 3rd century AD. It was translated by G.R.S. Mead and first published in 1896, with a fully revised edition in 1921 and a reprint in 1947. In this extract from the manuscript, Jesus and his disciples, who are not named, were gathered together on a mountain on the day of the full moon, shortly after dawn. It came to pass that there came forth from behind him a great light power, shining most exceedingly, and there was no measure to the light conjoined with it. For it came out of the light of lights, and that light power came down over Jesus and surrounded him entirely, while he was seated removed from his disciples. And he had shone exceedingly, and there was no measure for the light which was on him. And the disciples had not seen Jesus because of the great light in which he was, or which was about him, for their eyes were darkened because of the great light in which he was. But they saw only the light, which shot forth many light rays. And the light rays were not like one another, but the light was of divers kind, and it was of divers type, from below upwards, one ray more excellent than the other, in one great immeasurable glory of light. It stretched from under the earth right up to heaven. And when the disciples saw that light, they fell into great fear and great agitation. It came to pass then, when that light power had come down over Jesus, that it gradually surrounded him entirely. Then Jesus ascended or soared into the height, shining most exceedingly in an immeasurable light. And the disciples gazed after him, and none of them spake until he had reached unto heaven. But they all kept in deep silence. In our own time, there is the remarkable testimony of Gopi Krishna, who in 1937 experienced a sudden and overwhelming ascent of Kundalini, described in his book Kundalini, that was published in 1967, with a commentary by the Jungian analyst James Hillman. In an interview published in a recent book called Kundalini Rising, 2010, he says that the stage is being set for a movement from the outer world to the inner world of consciousness, that an unlived potential of human consciousness, a suprasensory channel of cognition, is being activated and will in time manifest in our species. He believes that we may eventually be able to answer the question, how does eternal consciousness come to be embodied and then rise step by step through aeonian spans of time to the realization of its own sovereignty? And also the question of how this process unfolds in the organic evolution of the brain. Bearing witness to the fact that this supersensory channel of cognition has been opened in himself, he writes that at every moment of his life, he lives in two worlds. One is the sensory world which we all share together. My reactions to this world are the same as of other human beings. The other is an amazing supersensory world. I am always conscious of a luminous glow, not only in my interior, but pervading the whole field of my vision during the hours of my wakefulness. I literally live in a world of light. It is as if a light were burning in my interior, filling me with a lustre so beautiful and so ravishing that my attention is again and again drawn towards it. I do not claim that I see God, but I am conscious of a living radiance both within and outside of myself. In other words, I have gained a new power of perception that was not present before. The luminosity does not end with my waking time. It persists even in my dreams. The enchanting light I perceive both internally and outside is alive. It pulses with life and intelligence. It is like an infinite ocean of awareness, pervading my own small pool of consciousness within and the whole universe I perceive with my senses outside. For me, the universe is alive, a stupendous intelligence that I can sense but never fathom, looms behind every object and every event in the universe, silent, still, serene, and immovable like a mountain. It is a staggering spectacle. Thirdly, there is the moving testimony of Christopher Bache, author of Dark Night, Early Dawn, whose words I have quoted before. He writes, I was brought to an encounter with a unified energy field underlying all physical existence. I was confronting an enormous field of blindingly bright, incredibly intense energy. This energy was the single energy that comprised all existence. He continues, the unified field underlying physical existence completely dissolved all boundaries. As I moved deeper into it, all borders fell away. All appearances of division were ultimately illusory. No boundaries between incarnations, between human beings, between species, even between matter and spirit. The world of individuated existence was not collapsing into an amorphous mass, as it might sound, but rather was revealing itself to be an exquisitely diversified manifestation of a single entity. Though these experiences were extraordinary in their own right, the most poignant aspect was not the discovered dimensions of the universe themselves, but what my seeing and understanding them meant to the consciousness I was with. It seemed so pleased to have someone to show its work to. I felt that it had been waiting for billions of years for embodied consciousness to evolve to the point where we could at last begin to see, understand, and appreciate what had been accomplished. I felt the loneliness of this intelligence, having created such a masterpiece and having no one to appreciate its work, and I wept. I wept for its isolation and in awe of the profound love which had accepted this isolation as part of a larger plan. Behind creation lies a love of extraordinary proportions, and all of existence is an expression of this love. The intelligence of the universe's design is equally matched by the depth of love that inspired it. Thousands of people who have had a near-death or out-of-the-body experience have borne witness to the all-embracing light they see and the unconditional love they experience. One particular account of such an experience has moved and impressed me deeply. It is an out-of-body experience of a man called Mellon Thomas Benedict, who described what happened to him during the hours after he had clinically died of cancer, later returning to life. He describes the journey he took into the light and how the light answered his questions and took him deeper and deeper into itself. Because the description of his experience is so memorable, so clearly expressed and so inspiring, I have, with his permission, included it as an appendix to this book, in the hope that it will interest, inspire, and help others. His experience offers a message of hope for humanity, delivered with a joy and clarity that is astonishing and authentic. Epilogue. During the 20 years I have been writing this book on the soul, my own consciousness has been changed by the process of writing it, and by the facts and ideas I discovered while researching the different chapters. While I have been experiencing this change, a similar change has been taking place in the collective consciousness of humanity. Not only are the long-established political, economic, financial, and religious institutions in disarray, but the whole ethos of power and dominance that has driven Western civilization for some 4,000 years is faltering in the face of the grave problems we face, many of which have been created by this ethos and cannot be resolved by continuing with the old responses. What is being born in the collapse and dissolution of the old mythologies, the old belief systems which have divided instead of uniting humanity, is the recognition that we do not live within a meaningless, dead universe, but within a sacred cosmic order, and that we have a responsibility to attune ourselves to the service of that order to the best of our ability. We face a choice between continuing in the patterns of the past, which may lead to our extinction, or beginning to live and act from this radically different understanding of life and of ourselves. The immensity of the task facing us is daunting, yet the indomitable courage and creativity of our species can rise to it, challenging the depravity, greed, and malignancy that characterize the worst aspects of the old order. Since at the quantum level we are all connected, when thousands of us begin to change our consciousness, millions will be affected. It could be said that the incarnation did not end with the life of Christ. Rather, it can be understood as a process unfolding through millennia in the lives of thousands, even millions of individuals, many of whom are not affiliated to any religious tradition. The great images of the Christian myth, like the Annunciation, are archetypal realities that can come alive again in our time, because an arduous process of birth is taking place in the collective soul of humanity. We are awakening to what I have called the dream of the cosmos, the dream of an enlightened humanity engaging in a new role on this planet, a role that is in harmony with the evolutionary intention of the cosmos, and is no longer driven by the quest for power, conquest and control, and the appropriation of the earth's resources for the benefit of the few. As we begin consciously to align ourselves with this luminous ground of reality, our minds will serve the deepest longing of our heart, the deepest wisdom of our soul. We will know who we are and why we are here. The passionate longing of the human heart has always been to press beyond the boundaries of the known, to break through the limitations of our understanding, to extend the horizon of our awareness. This is perhaps our most fundamental and essential freedom. Now, more than ever, we need to honor that longing and welcome those pioneers who can unveil new horizons, new possibilities of understanding our nature, our potential, and our destiny. In the words of T.S. Eliot in his great poem Ash Wednesday, we need to redeem the time, redeem the unread vision in the higher dream.